It was a day meant to honor heroes, solemn, respectful, and deeply emotional. Rows of soldiers stood in perfect formation, their uniforms crisp, their faces unreadable. In the center of it all was Prince Harry, a man who had seen the weight of military service firsthand. Unlike other royal appearances, this wasn't just another ceremonial event for him. This was personal. As he stood there, preparing to speak, his eyes scanned the crowd. Families of fallen soldiers sat in the front row, some clutching medals, others holding back tears. And then amidst them, he noticed a young boy, no older than 6, clutching a framed photograph. Beside him, his mother held his tiny hand, her grip firm yet gentle. For a split second, something in Prince Harry's expression changed. The confident, poised demeanor shifted into something raw, something real. But no one could have predicted what would happen next, because in just a few moments, Prince Harry would do something that no one in that audience, no one in the world, expected, and it would leave everyone in tears. But before we get to that moment, let's talk about why this day meant so much to him. Why this wasn't just another royal duty, but something that would remind him and all of us about the sacrifices that never fade. Prince Harry has never been the kind of royal to simply observe from a distance. His connection to the military isn't just symbolic, it's real. Unlike many in his position, he didn't just visit troops for photo ops. He served alongside them. For 10 years, he wore the uniform, lived the discipline, and understood the unspoken bond that soldiers share. During his time in the British Army, he completed 2 tours in Afghanistan. He knew the sound of helicopters overhead, the weight of gear on his back, and the sharp pang of loss when a fellow soldier didn't make it home. He wasn't Prince Harry in those moments. He was simply Captain Wales, another soldier among many, and that changed him forever. That's why this event wasn't just another public appearance for him. It was a reminder of the sacrifices made by those who serve. He knew what it meant for the families sitting in the front rows, the mothers, fathers, wives, husbands, and children who had to move forward despite the void left behind. And perhaps, more than anyone else in the royal family, Harry understood the weight of losing someone you loved too soon. When he was just 12 years old, he walked behind his mother's coffin, the world watching as he kept his emotions locked behind a solemn face. He knew the feeling of grief that was too big to put into words. And standing here today, looking at the faces of those who had lost their loved ones in service, he wasn't just seeing a crowd. He was seeing echoes of his own past. That's why, when his eyes landed on that little boy clutching a photograph, something inside him stirred. The speech he had prepared suddenly didn't feel like enough, because in that moment, he wasn't a prince. He wasn't a public figure. He was just a man who understood loss. And what happened next, no one was ready for. If you had the chance to say one thing to a grieving child, what would it be? Let's talk in the comments. Among the sea of dignitaries, decorated officers, and grieving families sat Sarah Thompson and her 6-year-old son, Noah. They were not accustomed to the grandeur of royal ceremonies, nor did they seek the spotlight. Yet, today, all eyes would unknowingly turn to them. Sarah had been preparing for this day for weeks, practicing how to hold her emotions together, how to stay composed in the presence of royalty. But no amount of preparation could ever truly numb the pain of attending a memorial for fallen soldiers when the man you lost was one of them. Her husband, Sergeant James Thompson, had been more than just a soldier. He was a father, a friend, a man who had once whispered bedtime stories to Noah about brave knights and heroic adventurers. He had promised a return. But war doesn't honor promises. A year had passed since that fateful knock on the door, the one every military family dreads. The neatly dressed officers, the hushed condolences, the folded flag. The surreal feeling that life had changed in an instant. Today, Sarah held on to that very flag, neatly pressed and encased in a wooden frame. In Noah's small hands, a photograph of his father remained clutched tightly against his chest, the edges slightly bent from the countless times he had traced his father's smile. Noah didn't fully understand the weight of the ceremony. He only knew that his dad wasn't coming home. And in his young mind, today wasn't just about soldiers. It was about his soldier. As speeches were given and solemn tributes played, Sarah kept her eyes forward, her posture unwavering. But inside, Her heart ached with a mix of pride and sorrow. She wanted Noah to feel connected to his father's legacy, to understand that his father's sacrifice was not forgotten. And then, as the ceremony unfolded, something unexpected happened. Prince Harry, who had been delivering his speech with the practiced ease of a man who had spent years in the public eye, suddenly paused. His gaze had settled on Noah and Sarah. For a moment, everything else faded. The cameras, the crowd, the formalities. It was as if he had been transported to a different time, a different place. Because for Prince Harry, this was more than just another event. It was a reminder of what it meant to serve, what it meant to lose, and what it meant to be left behind. No one in that audience could have predicted what would happen next. And in the moments that followed, an entire nation would witness something unforgettable. The weight of the ceremony pressed down on the gathering like an unspoken force, heavy yet sacred. Prince Harry stood at the podium, his speech carefully prepared, every word meant to honor the fallen. But as he spoke, his gaze kept drifting toward the front row. Among the grieving families, his eyes locked onto a small boy, 6 years old, maybe 7, his tiny hands wrapped tightly around a framed photograph. The picture inside was slightly smudged, as if held too often by hands that refused to let go. Beside him, his mother sat stiffly, her face composed, but her fingers trembled ever so slightly as she clutched his hand. Something about them pulled at him. Perhaps it was the way the boy's legs barely reached the floor, or the way he kept stealing glances at his mother, as if searching for reassurance. Perhaps it was the way she gently squeezed his fingers each time the crowd erupted in applause, silently reminding him that they were here together. Harry swallowed hard. He had stood at many podiums before, spoken at events filled with powerful figures. But this moment was different. For a second, his voice faltered, not enough for the audience to notice, but just enough for him to feel it. His throat tightened as he looked at the boy again, because Harry knew that look. The quiet ache of a child trying to be strong, trying to understand something far too big for him. He had been that boy once. And then, without a second thought, Harry did something unexpected. He stepped away from the podium. A murmur rippled to the crowd as he made his way down the steps, his polished shoes tapping softly against the stone. The formal script of the event dictated that he should return to his seat, but at this moment, protocol didn't matter. He was no longer just a prince standing before an audience. He was a soldier who had served, a man who had lost, a son who still carried the weight of his own grief. And now, he was walking straight toward the boy who reminded him so much of himself. Prince Harry had given countless speeches before, but this time, something felt different. Standing before the solemn crowd, he spoke with the weight of someone who understood their loss, not as a prince, but as a soldier. His words were measured, respectful, but behind them was an unmistakable sincerity. As he looked over the rows of families seated before him, his gaze lingered on one particular pair, a mother and her young son. The boy, barely 6, sat gripping a framed photograph, his tiny fingers wrapped around it as if letting go would somehow make his father's memory slip away. His mother, Sarah, held his hand tightly, her posture composed but her eyes betraying quiet grief she carried. For a brief moment, Harry's voice faltered. He had been trained for public speaking, trained to hold his composure no matter the situation. But this was different, because in that little boy, he saw himself. He knew what it was like to grow up with the shadow of loss. He knew what it was like to have the world tell you that your father was a hero, while all you wanted was for him to still be there. It was a pain that never truly left. It only changed shape. The speech continued, but Harry's mind kept drifting back to the boy. He wasn't just another face in the crowd. He was a reminder of why the ceremony wasn't just about remembering the past. It was about honoring the living, those who carried the weight of sacrifice long after the last gunfire had faded. And then, as he finished his speech, something unexpected happened. Instead of stepping back, instead of following the usual royal protocol, Harry did something that caught everyone off guard. He stepped off the stage. The crowd watched in silence as he walked straight toward a mother and her son. Soldiers stood at attention, unsure of what was about to unfold. Cameras zoomed in, capturing every moment. Sarah looked up in disbelief as Prince Harry approached, his eyes warm yet filled with an unspoken understanding. And in that instant, it became clear This wasn't about royalty. This wasn't about ceremony. This was about connection. About a prince who knew what it meant to lose a father. About a little boy who would remember this moment for the rest of his life. And in just a few seconds, something even more powerful was about to happen. The moment Prince Harry stepped toward them, the entire crowd seemed to hold its breath. This wasn't part of the official plan. There was no script for this. Yet, with every step he took, it became clear that this was exactly where he was meant to be. Sarah Thompson, the young boy's mother, looked up as Harry approached, her eyes already glistening with unshed tears. She had met officials before, had shaken hands with generals, received condolences from dignitaries. But this felt different. This wasn't just formality. This was human. Harry knelt down, leveling himself with the child. His voice, always so steady during speeches, softened. "That's your dad, isn't it?" The little boy, Noah, nodded, his small hands gripping the framed photograph even tighter. He was a soldier, like you were. Something flickered in Harry's expression. He had been in uniform, had served alongside men like Sergeant James Thompson, the father in that frame. He had felt the weight of loss before, but standing here, in front of Noah, it felt different. It felt personal. For a moment, words escaped him. What could you possibly say to a child who had lost his hero? So, instead of speaking, Harry did something that spoke louder than any words ever could. He placed a hand over his own heart. A silent tribute, an unspoken bond between two people who understood loss in a way most never would. The silence stretched between them, heavy yet comforting. And then, as if instinctively knowing what to do, Noah straightened his tiny shoulders. His expression turned serious. And then, with all the dignity his little body could muster, he slowly lifted his hand to his forehead. A salute. It was small, a little wobbly, but it was full of meaning. A child honoring not just his father, but the man kneeling before him, the one who had taken the time to truly see him. The crowd gasped. Soldiers, hardened by years of service, discreetly wiped at their eyes. Even Sarah let out a shaky breath, her composure barely holding. For a long moment, Harry just looked at Noah, his own emotions barely contained. And then, slowly, he returned the salute, not as a prince, not as a public figure, but as a fellow soldier. It was a gesture that transcended rank, status, and titles. It was raw, real, and powerful. And in that moment, the weight of every sacrifice, every story of loss, and every silent grief shared among military families felt seen. A prince and a little boy, bound not by royalty, but by something far greater. Remembering as the weight of the moment settled over the crowd, there was an unspoken understanding. Something significant was about to happen. Prince Harry, still kneeling before young Noah, studied the framed photograph in the boy's hands. It was a picture of a man in uniform, standing tall, full of life and purpose. Sergeant James Thompson, a husband, a father, a hero. Noah clutched the frame tightly, as if afraid that letting go would somehow erase the connection. His small fingers traced the edge of the glass, his wide eyes filled with emotions far beyond his years. "That's my dad," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the silence that had fallen upon the crowd. Harry swallowed hard. He had met countless military families, attended memorials, spoken to grieving loved ones. But this was different. He saw himself in Noah, a boy who had lost a father far too soon, a child trying to understand absence, try and make sense of a world that had taken someone irreplaceable. Then, as if guided by instinct, Noah did something that sent a wave of emotion through every single person watching. He slowly lifted his right hand to his forehead, a salute. It wasn't perfect. His small fingers trembled slightly, and his posture wavered, but the intention behind it was pure. A tribute, a message, a son honoring his father the only way he knew how. The crowd seemed frozen in time. Soldiers who had stood at attention for hours now blinked rapidly, their chests rising and falling with unsteady breaths. Mothers clutched their children a little tighter. Even those who had never known Sergeant Thompson felt the weight of his absence in that moment. Prince Harry's eyes glistened as he took a breath. Then slowly, with the utmost respect, he returned the salute. It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't done for cameras. It was a silent promise. a soldier recognizing another, a man acknowledging a legacy. And then, without hesitation, Harry reached forward and placed a gentle hand on Noah's shoulder. "Your dad was a hero," he said softly, the words carrying more weight than any speech he had prepared for the day. "And I know he'd be incredibly proud of you." The moment lingered, stretching out in a profound stillness. Then, without a word, Noah lowered a salute and stepped forward. Before anyone could react, he wrapped his small arms around Prince Harry in a hug so pure, so full of unspoken grief and gratitude, that it broke whatever composure was left in the crowd. A few sniffles turned into muffled sobs. Cameras captured the moment, but it was clear this wasn't for the world. This was for them, for a boy who needed to be seen, for a prince who had lived through the same pain, for a father who would never be forgotten. That embrace wasn't just between two people. It was a moment shared by every family who had ever lost a soldier, every child who had ever longed for one more hug, and every person who understood that true sacrifice never fades. It lives on in the hearts of those left behind. Among the many families seated in the front row, Sarah Thompson and her son Noah sat quietly, their presence both heartbreaking and deeply meaningful. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she held the framed photograph of her late husband, Sergeant James Thompson. Her fingers absently traced the edges of the frame, as if memorizing every detail. Noah, just 6 years old, sat beside her, his small hands gripping the hem of her coat. He didn't fully understand the way of the day, but he understood one thing. His father was a hero. It had been a year since James had been killed in action, a year since Sarah had last heard his voice, last felt his arms around her. The weight of his absence was something she carried every day. But today, surrounded by soldiers who would serve alongside him, the pain felt heavier. She had almost not come. Facing the memories, the stories, the tributes, it was overwhelming. But then she thought of Noah. She had told him about this event, explaining that they were going to honor his father and all the other brave soldiers. Noah had asked if his dad would be there. She had swallowed the lump in her throat and told him the truth. "Not in the way we wish, sweetheart. But yes, in every other way, he will be." And so they were here in the front row, among others who understood their loss. Prince Harry's speech had begun, his voice steady yet full of emotion. He spoke of duty, of sacrifice, of the bonds formed in service. But as he spoke, his gaze kept returning to the young boy clutching the framed photo. There was something hauntingly familiar about Noah, his quiet strength, the way he clung to his father's memory. And suddenly, Prince Harry wasn't just a royal standing before a crowd. He was a boy again, a boy who had once walked behind his own mother at his father's funeral, struggling to grasp the magnitude of loss. Sarah noticed it, the way Harry's voice wavered ever so slightly when his eyes met hers. For a brief moment, it felt as though they were the only two people there, two individuals who understood, without words, what it meant to grieve a soldier. Noah shifted beside her, his gaze locked on Prince Harry, and then, softly, he spoke. "Did you know my dad?" The question, innocent yet profound, carried through the silence. Sarah's breath caught. Around them, the audience seemed to pause. Prince Harry stopped mid-sentence, his eyes lowering to meet Noah's. For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then, slowly, he stepped forward, closing the distance between them. "I didn't," he admitted gently. "But I know he was a great man." Noah nodded, gripping the framed photo a little tighter. "He was the best." Sarah blinked rapidly, her heart aching for her son, for her husband, for this moment that had taken them all by surprise. Prince Harry crouched down, leveling himself with Noah. "Do you know what makes someone a hero?" he asked. Noah thought for a moment, then whispered, "Being brave?" Harry smiled, though there was sadness in his eyes. "That's right. And you know what? I think your dad would say you're very brave, too." The air was thick with emotion. Around them, there was barely a dry eyed crowd. Even the most hardened soldiers seemed to shift, swallowing back the lump in their throats. Sarah squeezed her son's hand, a silent reminder that he wasn't alone, that he never would be. And in that moment, under the weight of grief and remembrance, it became clear this wasn't just a ceremony. It was a testament to the love, the strength and the sacrifices of those left behind. With a deep breath, Prince Harry stepped forward, his voice steady but thick with emotion. This day isn't about me. It's about them. He gestured toward the families, his gaze locking onto the young boy in the front row. A hush fell over the crowd as he slowly removed a medal from his own chest, the one he had earned during his years of service. Without hesitation, he walked toward the boy, knelt before him, and placed a medal in his small hands. "This belongs to your father," Harry said softly. "And to you." The boy's lip quivered as he clutched the medal, his mother letting out a quiet sob. Prince Harry stood, straightened his uniform, and saluted. A ripple of emotion spread through the crowd, soldiers and civilians alike standing to join him. It was a moment not just of remembrance, but of honor, of sacrifice, of a prince choosing to be a soldier first. And in that silence, the world saw not just royalty, but a man who truly understood the weight of service. The applause was slow at first, then thunderous. But Prince Harry had already turned away, his job done.